Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about battlecruisers. So, we'll kick this off. My good friend Dreadnought posted on his channel, and we've got this link down below, a video about the Alaska-class large cruisers. And in that video, he has the beginning of a discussion about are the Alaska's battle cruisers and are the Iowa-class battleships battle cruisers. And I believe the specific question he asks is, would the Iowas have been considered battle cruisers if the Montanas had been built? So, I'm going to briefly talk about what a battle cruiser is and what criteria I use to define one. And I'm not going to answer that question yet today. Jack said he was going to post a future video answering that question, and I don't want to steal his thunder with my answer, so we'll probably post a video with my thoughts after he posts his. So, what is a battle cruiser? Battle cruisers evolved out of the armored cruisers of the pre-dreadnought era. In the age before the dreadnoughts, you had battleships, now known as pre-dreadnought battleships. You know, the Navy's real creative when it comes to naming things, and armored cruisers. Both ships were expected to be able to stand in the line of battle. However, cruisers, armored cruisers, had a higher speed and were able to do commerce raiding and were often used as foreign station flagships and things like that. When HMS Dreadnought is built, becoming a super battleship, the first dreadnought, the British then innovate with the Invincible-class battle cruisers, which start off as an evolution of the armored cruiser. Now, with pre-dreadnought battleships, you tend to have two main battery turrets, usually 12 inches, although there were a couple different other calibers used. The Germans tend to use 11, some Americans use 13, there are some other sizes thrown in there. And then they often had a secondary battery, also in turrets, of 8-inch guns. And so a battleship of this age would often have 4 12-inch guns and 8 8-inch guns as their primary armament. The armored cruisers tended to have usually between 4 and 8 8-inch guns as their primary armament. So they're sort of using battleship caliber guns at this point. Some armored cruisers even jump up to 10-inch guns, such as the American Tennessee class, and some, like some of the late Japanese armored cruisers, even had 12-inch guns in that pre-dreadnought layout. Typically, an armored cruiser would be armored against its own size guns, those 8-inch guns, rather than against the full 12-inch guns that battleships tended to be armored against. So in other ways, they tended to be about the same cost and displacement as a battleship. And many countries, I say that as if there were a lot of countries with naval superiority, countries that could afford it would often lay down a class of battleships and a class of armored cruisers in a given year. Sometimes you get a country like the United States, which was an aspiring power. They could only get the funding for one type of ship, so they built battleship after battleship for successive years, and then in wartime they would get the funding to build a couple of armored cruisers to go along with it. And this continues into the dreadnought era. In the dreadnought era, the playing field is wiped, and this new class of ships evolves, the battle cruiser. The battle cruisers are about the same size and displacement as a dreadnought-type battleship. They've got the same caliber main battery gun as dreadnoughts of that year. So HMS Dreadnought has 10 12-inch guns. HMS Invincible was built with 8 12-inch guns. And we'll come back to the number of barrels, but it's the same caliber guns. When the dreadnoughts jump up to 13.5 or 14 or 16-inch main battery guns, you also see the battle cruisers being designed parallel to these battleships, also jumping up in size to 13.5, 14, 16, whatever the case is. The battle cruisers always have higher speed than that year's battleships. HMS Dreadnought, with her new turbines, gets a speed of 21 knots, which becomes more or less the standard of the dreadnought era. And HMS Invincible is a little bit faster than that. 21 knots, by the way, was the speed of armored cruisers, by and large, the average speed. Whereas pre-dreadnought battleships were only doing 18 knots. So HMS Dreadnought, in an instant, renders armored cruisers and dreadnought, pre-dreadnought battleships obsolete. There are still a bunch of armored cruisers out there, including some last generation ones like the German Blucher, the American Tennessees, that are pretty big and powerful, which is why a cruiser killer, the Battlecruiser, is designed. The British have worldwide maritime trade to protect, and so they need a type of ship that can go around and sink these enemy armored cruisers with impunity. And it absolutely renders them useless. We see this in the Battle of the Falklands, where a pair of British battlecruisers are able to sink probably the two best trained and experienced armored cruiser crews in the world at the time, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. So that's neither here nor there. What else makes a battlecruiser a battlecruiser? There were only a couple of classes made. Great Britain had several successive classes, and so the German High Seas Fleet also built several successive classes of these to compete. They could be used to scout for the main fleet, or to launch raids as an entire formation, or individually for commerce raiding, in theory, or hunting commerce raiders. Japan built a couple of battle cruisers as well, although these later get named battleships. A couple of other countries laid down battle cruisers during the World War I era, during the dreadnought era, but they don't really get completed because these are every bit as expensive as battleships. The problem is they have to offset the weight of their main engines somehow. The engines are really powerful to make them move fast. They are longer and narrower typically than their battleship counterparts. They've got these main guns, so what are they cutting the weight from? The armor plate. Whereas dreadnoughts tend to be armored against their own size guns, battle cruisers tend to only be armed against cruiser caliber guns, usually 8-inch guns. So this gives them the extra reserve of buoyancy to put in these big engines and go faster. They're typically the same weight and otherwise size of a battleship. In my opinion, HMS Renown is the last battle cruiser that's completed. Battle cruisers then fall out of favor, and you see the battle cruiser and the battleship lines merging into fast battleships. HMS Hood would be an example of this, although it's still debated whether she's a battleship or a battle cruiser. I consider her a fast battleship as its own separate type. The Iowa-class battleships I would also put into that category. One day we'll do a video where I just talk about how I classify every type of battleship and where they fit. What are Scharnhorst and Gneisenau? They've got high-speed, heavy armor, low guns. That's not a class that's named. What's Hood? What's Iowa? What are the treaty battleships? Are they fast battleships? We'll talk about that in the future. Right now, talking about battle cruisers. My rule of thumb for a battle cruiser is it's typically the same size as the battleship of that same year. It always has the same size gun as that year's battleship design, but usually either one less turret or one less barrel per turret. I'll use the American example here. So the Lexington-class battle cruisers of 1916 laid down, never completed, turned into aircraft carriers. They were designed with 8 16-inch 50 caliber guns in 4 twin turrets. Their contemporary battleship, the South Dakota class, which was canceled in 1922 alongside the Lexington class, had 12 16-inch 50 caliber guns in 4 triple turrets instead of twin turrets. So they've lost a little bit of firepower here. HMS Invincible, we talked about before, has 4 twin 12-inch turrets where Dreadnought had 5. So often, to save some weight and more realistically because there's no room in the hull with all the engineering equipment to install another turret and magazines. Because remember, a gun turret isn't just something sitting on deck. It is a multi-story structure that goes almost all the way to the keel with several layers of powder and shells and electrical equipment before you actually get to the gun house itself. So dropping that in the middle of your ship means that you've got to move your engine rooms around that. So, if a ship is built that isn't the same size as that year's battleship, I call that a cruiser killer. That's what I would consider an Alaska-class large cruiser to be. And in the World War I, or in the interwar to World War II area, you see a number of cruiser killer designs, such as the Japanese B-65, the Dutch battlecruiser design of this period, the Alaskas, of course. They are all significantly smaller than contemporary battleships. They're just for hunting down battlecruisers, but they're not full-on capital ships like the older dreadnought-style battlecruisers. If a ship is about a quarter larger than a contemporary battleship, then that's a fast battleship. So like Hood, it's contemporary to the R-class battleships, has a similar level of armor protection to the R-class battleships, has a similar level of firepower. Both have 8 15-inch guns. What's different, Hood is about 10,000 tons heavier, and they invest all that weight in speed so that the ship is about 11 knots faster. Likewise, the Iowas have the same armor and almost the same firepower as a South Dakota-class battleship. With 10,000 tons extra displacement, they become 6 knots faster because they're stretched out. The visual indicator is that extra smokestack on deck. That's extra boiler power firing these ships so they can go faster. So even though Iowa-class battleships create 212,000 horsepower, this gear reduction box I'm sitting on right now in engine room number 2 can create 54,000 shaft horsepower alone, even though that is the most of any battleship ever built, or battlecruiser, or large cruiser, or dreadnought, or any of these terms for all big gun capital ship warships. And even though New Jersey is the fastest one ever built with a speed of 35.2 knots, faster than any battlecruiser ever built, I do not consider her a battlecruiser. I consider her to be a fast battleship, and that is a separate class of ships. Drac, in his video, did a really good job of talking about what he would expect a battlecruiser in the American Navy in that time period to look like. That it should have one less gun turret or less barrel per gun at about the same size. So that would be a South Dakota-class battleship that's been stretched to about an Iowa-class size, but it would only have 6 16-inch guns instead of 9. And I think that made good sense. And it would probably have only enough armor to protect itself against cruiser caliber guns, which the Iowas are supposed to be designed against battleship caliber guns. In a future video, when we talk about the Iowas in particular, we'll talk about their armor and why the level of armor here is an argument that they're a battle cruiser and some of those other things. But otherwise, there is my not at all short history of battle cruisers. Battle cruisers begin in 1916. The last battle cruisers completed are Repulse and Renown. There are still some battle cruisers under construction, like the Lexingtons, the Amagis, and the Mackinsons. At the end of World War I, none of them end up being completed. During World War II, there are some battle cruiser designs that are started, like the German O class. That is a traditional battle cruiser. It's got 6 15-inch guns instead of the 8 that the contemporary Bismarck class has, and light armor and high speed for commerce rating. But it's not completed. And like everything else the German Navy was doing during World War II, it's all terrible World War I era concepts being resuscitated in an age long after they should be dead. Likewise, some of the preliminary designs for Iowa herself are for a battlecruiser style ship to protect the sea lanes of communications and directly compete with the Congo class. Thankfully, the escalator clause allows the Iowas to jump up to 45,000 tons instead of 35,000 tons, and that gives them the extra room for the armor and the full main battery and everything else. So, what do you think? Iowa class battlecruisers or not? Start the conversation down in the discussion area below. Let us know what you think makes them battlecruisers or not battlecruisers. Let us know what you think some of the distinctions between these various sorts of all big gun capital ships are, and we'll talk about it in the future video. And be sure to jump over to Drax's channel, check out his video about the Alaska class. Gorgeous ships. I absolutely love the Alaskas. And his thoughts on what type of ship they are. And be sure to follow Drax's channel so that you know when he releases his video on if the Iowas are battlecruisers or not. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate your support. There's a link in the description below to donate if you would like to continue supporting our channel and our museum. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find out about the museum. Thanks for watching.